What's up, everybody? What's going on? Another Fresh CFO Fridays. I'll give some time for people to come in. Hope you're all enjoying your Fridays. As you guys are coming in, please drop in the chat. I left that question out there. Where you're from, who you are. Last week I did a great kind of teaser of your week. So if you were to describe your best moment that you had this week, what would the word be? So for all those coming in, drop that in the chat. We'll give a couple minutes here before we start. Really excited about today's session over niching. We're gonna get into that, but I think for me, if I was able to think about a word of the best moment, it would probably be like reflection. That'll be my word, reflection. I had a great conversation this week with a college student at University of Indianapolis reached out to me, and he reached out to me wanting to know more about my experience through accounting finance, my entrepreneurship journey. He wanted to know a couple other things. So that will be my word. Drop it in the chat. We're at 12:01. We'll give it probably here another minute, and then we'll kick this thing off. Hope everybody's having a good Friday. It's it's gloom. It's not gloomy, but in Indiana, for everybody that knows, in Indiana, we just had a semi, like, not even like a blizzard, but little snows out there, and it's like that white kind of snow where it's like bouncing you off. So like you look off in the distance and it's like popping out at you. But cool. All right, it's 12:02. Let's go ahead and kick it off. So today you'll learn about the pros and cons of niching and are not niching in your fractional CFO business. For everybody that is new to Fresh CFO Fridays, hi, I'm Chris Ortega. I'm the CEO of Fresh FP&A, and we help businesses transform and scale their finance organization by providing fractional CFO and advisory services. Fresh FP&A has provided significant value and impact for CEOs, founders, and businesses all across the world to help scale their finance organization, to help them focus on the value added parts of their business. And we've helped clients all across the globe. And today I'm excited to share with you the journey around niching. So before we go into the pros and cons of niching and all the details, I kind of want to give you kind of like a backstory. So when I started my Fresh FP&A business, I have a great group of mentors. I have a great group of people that I talk with, great people that have been there, done that, kind of across the board. And when I think back, almost it'll be a year next week, guys. It's gonna be a year of doing Fresh FP&A full time. But when I started getting into the business and learning, like it was literally like one thing I found that my mentors were kind of split on both sides of the fence. I had mentors that were like, Chris, one of the things you have to do, and when I say mentor, these are people that have built accounting practices, they built fractional CFO practice, they built other project management consulting practices. Like they have been to the mountaintops when it comes to creating a service-based business, right? And one thing I found as I was learning and having these conversations and absorbing a lot of feedback from them is you really had like no, it was not a clear direction on which one is the right way to go, niche or not niche. So part of what I wanted to provide here today was just my insights, my reflection, a lot of the viewpoints to help you as you think about building your fractional CFO business. Should you or should you not? So that's a little context of why I think a lot of conversations, and I have a lot of conversations with fractional CFOs across the world. Earlier this week, I was talking with a fractional CFO in Brazil, and she was thinking about we talk about the same topic, and time again in my conversations, I feel like this is like a really good pivotal point to talk about. So one of the things I just want to share just from my experience, right? I want to disclaim, right? Like this is from my experience, this is from my viewpoint. This is not me telling you like what is the right way or what is the wrong way. Because I think there's, as you'll see as we talk about, there's plenty of different ways to think about, but you ultimately at the end of the day have to make the best decision for your fractional CFO business. So let's jump right into it. So thinking about niching or not niching. I'm going to give you some pros and cons. And just again, this is from my insight, from my experience, and from the things that I've learned from the mentors I've been able to leverage. So let's jump right into the niching. So the first pro that I would say for specifically around niching is the intimacy and master level knowledge that you know from your ideal customer, right? That's definitely a pro. So when you niche, I talked with the fractional CFO earlier this month, and he came to me and he's like, Chris, I'm making the leap of faith. I'm jumping out on my own, and I know exactly who I want to target. I want to target these kind of businesses in this kind of industry with this kind of pain problem. And like he had his facts down, and he intimately knew his ideal customer profile, right? He knew the frustrations, he knew the pain, he knew the opportunities. He intimately knew that pain and that customer. And a lot of it came from his prior experience that he's had in accounting, finance, and financial leadership as well. It's like, he's like, I know this, right? And while that was so helpful, and my advice to him was like, man, you know it. Now you just got to marry those pains, those problems, those frustrations to solutions that you could provide. So I think that's one major pro of niching, is that you intimately know your ideal customer profile. The second one is now that you've known your ideal customer profile, like you know that customer's pain, the frustrations, all those different things, now you can build from a resource perspective your business around that, right? Like now you could build your fractional CFO services, your business development side, your marketing strategy, all the things that come along with not just doing the work but supporting the work as well too. Now you can build all that infrastructure out. So pro of another pro of niching is that resource consumption. You're definitely going to know like the resources you need, the expertise you're going to need, the knowledge, the development that you need to bring on. So I think that's a major one, a major pro of niching as well too. Number three is if there's a viable market, you intimately know the pain and frustrations, you know those solutions, you have built a business infrastructure around that pain, and it's a viable business. Now what you become is you become the go-to source in that, right? So let me give you an example. There's a fractional CFO that I know based in Washington, D.C., based on the East Coast. And I had a chance to connect with her. And she's like, Chris, I'm a fractional CFO. I come from the non-for-profit space. I specifically work with these sorts of non-for-profits. I know who I'm going after. I want to be the CFO for non-for-profits, right? And it was honestly my first time coming across a fractional CFO that is 100% dedicated to not for profits, and specifically the not for profits that she wanted to be dedicated to. And I'm like, this is awesome. Like, now you're becoming the go to source. And I looked at her LinkedIn profile and I did some investigation and looking at her. And I'm like, she's crushing it, right? She intimately knows the pain because she's been there, done that, which it's something we talked about like last time, right? You gotta know that pain, right? You gotta know that business. You gotta been through some wars and been through some trenches of it. And she's completely established herself as like the go-to source in her community, right? From that third pro that I just talked about. And what that's also created for her, which is a huge opportunity, and what she shared with me was like, Chris, I don't have to do prospecting, right? Like her word of mouth and the clients that she's been able to serve, the pain that she's been able to solve, the solutions that she's been able to provide specifically for her ICP. And because she's become the go-to financial resource for her ICP, her ideal customer profile, the referral business that she creates, it works for herself. And it was so interesting hearing her story because she's like, hey man, I don't have to do prospecting. I don't have to do business development. Like the clients that we serve and the word of mouth and the connections to say, hey, I know her and she does this great work with us. You should probably talk with her. She's creating an entire like multi-million dollar like business and network for herself. So I think that's the third one is, you talk about that. Now you become the go-to source. Now you have that. The fourth one is if you really know the pain, the four that we just talked about, less competition, right? Like you're going into a space where this is like the red ocean, blue ocean concept, right? Like when you think of a red ocean is very diluted. There's a lot of people in that space. The number of clients, the opportunities, the customer acquisition costs, all those different things that you have to go in and do versus a blue ocean where there's not a lot of people fishing out there. There's a plenty of fish to have out there, plenty of clients to connect with, plenty of value to provide. And I would say the fourth pro around niching is less competition. The fifth pro is like the brand and customer loyalty that you get with it. It kind of dovetails off of what I talked about before when you've asserted yourself as that go-to resource, that go-to fractional CFO in your specific ICP and in your specific niche. That loyalty is there, right? Like once people like that, the reluctancy of them to be able to leave or go find another like person, another fractional CFO to help support their business, that loyalty is there, right? So for me, when you think about niching, I would think that to me is the top five pros of niching, right? Repeating those again, intimacy and mastery level knowledge of that customer. You know the pain, you know the frustrations, you know the opportunities, you know what keeps them up at night, and you're able to translate that solution. That's pro number one. The second one is once you understand that, now you're able to align from a resource perspective in building your fractional CFO to address that ICP and that customer need. The third pro is if it creates a viable market, you become that go to source in that space, solving that specific problem by intimately knowing that specific customer. So you assert yourself as a market leader, as the go to fractional CFO in that space. The fourth one, less competition, right? You're in it. There's a lot of fish out there. There's a more than abundance of opportunity for you to be able to bring on new clients and to make an impact. And honestly, that fifth one is the brand and customer loyalty that you get. So those are my five pros around niching. Let's look at it the other way. Let's look at it from a con perspective. So one interesting thing that I did at this first con, right, is I did a Google search. And if you want to, you can pull up your browser right now. I'll give you some time to pull that up. And I did this Google search, right? The first thing I typed was business in the search bar, right? Business. That gave me 15,110,000,000 results, right? So think of that. That's 15 billion Google results that just gave. The second layer I did is I said businesses that are 10 to 15 million dollars in revenue, right? Just in a Google search. That gave me 2 billion results. So it went down from 15.1 billion to 2.2 billion in just that, right? Then I added to that. I said businesses that are 10 to 15 million dollars in revenue in California. That went down from 2.2 billion to 605 million, right? So that's the third layer to it. The fourth Google search that I did is businesses that are 10 to 15 million in revenue in California in the technology industry. So we went from 605 million to now 187 million results out of that Google search. Then the fifth one I did businesses that are 10 to 15 million dollars in revenue in California that are in the technology industry that are startups. That gave me 46 million results in Google. So at the top level, we started with 15 billion. We went down to 2.2 billion. We went down to 605 million. Then we went down to 187 million. Then we went down to 46 million. So the whole goal, like, what is that illustration showing? Look how that funnel is just consistently it's consistently narrowing down, right? You're sharpening your focus. But you're creating a smaller market opportunity for yourself, right? And specifically in the finance organization, right? Like you're very, 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 you're narrowing your focus. You're getting super laser focused. But when you think about the finance organization, right? Some of the issues that the finance organization has, like data governance, the low value proposition, they got the scorekeeping mindset. They're not great collaborators. We're not being strategically about guiding the business, right? Those key parameters are things that are probably a lot of finance organizations are dealing with that are just normal businesses, right? Not businesses in that Google search that are 10 to 50 million in California that are in the technology industry and their business stage is startup, right? You start to limit that opportunity, which another con that creates is the limited barriers of entry, right? So you see it time and time again. Drop in the chat if you watch Shark Tank, right? I love like I kind of have a love-hate relationship with Mr. Wonderful. Like anytime he posts on LinkedIn, I'm like, bro, you're kind of cringe, but I respect you. And you have good insights, and sometimes it's like I like to challenge your ideas, right? But one of the things he talks about and why you never see him invest in niche products is like it's low barrier to entry. Like you can easily be replicated. Like somebody could go find, and in the day and age right now, with and you see this across the board with a lot of finance leaders, a lot of fractional CFOs leaders, the ability of somebody to just go copy you when you're limiting that focus so much, there's low barriers of entry. So it can become kind of what I talked about earlier, that red blue ocean kind of concept. It can become a red ocean really, really fast. So that's one of the cons of niching is the low barriers of entry. Another kind of niching is the difficulty to pivot into other markets, right? So if you find an opportunity and you're very focused here and you try to pivot away from that ICP, you're almost having like restarting the business all over again. Like you're starting from scratch to build another vertical. When I was leading finance organizations at SaaS company, we struggle with this. We exactly struggle with this. We were very niched. We only wanted to work with chambers of commerce and at this specific size that were domestic. We were so laser focused in that, and it was, it was, I would say it was a viable market. There was a business off of it, but we were not able to see the revenue growth that we were able to see. The population became very, very small, right? We had loyalty, but to get them to upsell and cross sell, to get higher market opportunity, higher ROIs out of that, it was really, really hard. And when the leadership team made the decision to say, okay, maybe we have to pivot away from chambers of commerce as our primary IC, domestic chambers of commerce that have this amount of employees, that have this amount of revenue size, that have this amount of partners in their program, right? Like it was so focused. And when we made the shift to go to associations, which is a like you look at scale of market size, like total addressable market, it was probably like 20 to 30 times larger than the chambers of commerce space. And when we made that pivot, it was really, really, it was a tumultuous year, and I would say year and a half that we went on that journey because we literally had to build an entire new business. We had to build a whole new infrastructure. We had to bring on people that knew the association space. We had to that opportunity to pivot, even though the total addressable market was 20 to 30 times, course correcting to go into that market was very, very, very costly. It was a lot of time, energy, effort, resources, and expertise to make that pivot. So that's my second con of niching is that if you find other opportunities in other verticals, or it becomes very, very difficult to pivot into those. And then I would say the third one is, and this comes from Mr. Wonderful. So one day, Mr. Wonderful, you're going to be watching Fresh CFO Fridays, right? Maybe I'll have you as a guest, Mr. Wonderful. Maybe you'll be on a guest with me here. But one of the things he talks about is, and I love this quote from him, and this is a quote direct from him, it's damn hard to rapidly scale a niche market, right? Like when you think about the contestants that go on the Shark Tank, right? And like you like watch any of Mr. Wonderful's things, anytime he talks about a niche, he's like, I'm out. I can't scale this. I've tried to do this before. If you're trying to, take a lot of his royalty agreements that he has, a lot of his like royalty plus a percentage afterwards. His deals are always like the funniest ones, man. Cause it's like, dude, you're making this so complicated. And then you got Mark Cuban over there, just like, dude, I'm out. I can't listen to this, right? But you'll see him that anytime he sees a niche, he always talks about these cons we talk about. It's low barriers to entry. Somebody can easily replicate what you're doing. It's difficult to pivot in other markets if you see other opportunities, right? And it's really, really hard to scale in a niche market. Like you can't scale as fast, right? Because you can't scale as fast because you've almost put yourself in a box in terms of what the opportunity is, right? Like in that Google search that I walked you through as that first con, you've literally taken this funnel and like literally narrowed it down to that place, right? It's very, very hard to say, okay, well, this one. And then I would say probably the fourth con out of after where it says really hard to scale, right? If it's not a viable market, right? Like if it's not a viable market looking for your fractional CFO services that are, 25 to $50 million of business and whatever your criteria is that you're trying to find as your ICP, right? If it's not a viable market for you and you look at it and you're like, man, I've pretty much rolled all this up and it's like, I've got everything that I can get out of this business. I don't know how much more we can tap into it with. um, that becomes difficulty to scale that. So I would say those are probably my top four cons around niching, right? Limiting that funnel, low barriers to entry to get into the market, difficult to pivot in your fractional CFO business into other markets that you want to go into. And it's really, really, really hard to scale when you niche down so specifically. And I think another thing is too, like, so like those are my pros and cons around the niching side. Now let's look at the non-niching. One of the pros around non-niching kind of talked about what I mentioned upon earlier, right? Like when you think about the finance organization, and this is like my viewpoint, right? When you think about a lot of the problems that the finance organization takes, right? Like data governance, data integrity, scorekeeping mindset, capacity constraints, definitely given the economic climate in right now, right? Not being strategically focused. We're too involved in the numbers and inflexible, right? A lot of those core issues and problems, they're the same at an enterprise level company all the way down to a seed level company, right? And at Fresh FP&A, we have clients across the board in that spectrum, right? Like they could be enterprise level, publicly traded, multinational clients, looking at, double digit revenue growth, over $250 million of business, all the way down to like a C level company, right? They're all going to have the same problem. But one of the main differences between that enterprise level client versus a seed, I would say startup, is the enterprise level client's going to have more time, energy, effort, resources to dedicate to solving that problem versus a startup kind of company. So the issues and problems are not this, they're not different. It's just the ability, capacity, and resources that that client has to dedicate to solve them, right? So if you get to understanding, one of the pros of not niching is that understand the broader topics that are understand the broader pains that intimately finance organizations are having, right? The second thing is it's you can gain more market insights while you have kind of like I would not recommend fractional CFOs to say, "Hey, Chris, I'm going to take your advice and go after all the niches." No, I would not recommend to do that. But if you kind of test things out, one of the things I love to do at Fresh FP&A, and I challenge my team on this, is like I love creating MVPs. Yes, I love creating a lot of most valuable players, 100%. But I love creating a lot of minimum viable products. So what does that mean? That is a solution that you're testing, right? Like I believe in like a lot of scientific like experimental testing, right? Like I challenge my team to come up with like a market hypothesis, and you say, "Hey, Chris, I think there's an opportunity in the teaching space online for fractional CFOs." Okay, let's test that hypothesis. So every quarter, and this is what I've been doing. This even goes back to when I was leading finance organization, and we had quarterly OKRs with my team. I would always give them quarterly OKRs, and those were always minimum. Those are at the time minimum viable projects that they would work on. But me, I like creating minimum viable products, right? Go test some things out, right? And if you haven't niche, you can choose a couple of those. Maybe you run, in a quarter, maybe you run them in a 6 month period, but you find these minimum viable products where you can kind of go test the market. You kind of poke at it and see, hey, there's an opportunity there. Let's create kind of an MVP. And this is a very agile based approach. Like coming from the software technology, high growth space, MVPs are always being created, right? You're always creating MVPs, seeing if things work. One of the best MVPs, and shout out to Google, they had this Stadia. They created MVP, which was a video game app, a video game that you can play online. It had a great experience that you can play on your phone. Basically, you can have these library of games that you can play across a lot of different platforms. It was an MVP to Google, right? They tested it out. You can take that same kind of agile, that same kind of hypothesis and experiment and confirmation around in your solutions if you haven't been niche. The third pro of not niching that I would say is you can scale in different verticals, right? So, like, say for instance, you have your fractional CFO business and you're focused on like high growth technology companies, right? Okay, you solve the intimate problems around that, and you understand not just the ideal customer, like that customer, but what are some of those broader pains and frustrations and difficulties and solution that you could provide to a complementary industry or now you can replicate, right? So now you have a lot more ability to handle different verticals because not only have you intimately known the customer, right? Micro level, you've understand the macro pains, frustrations, and solutions. Now you're like, okay, what's a complementary customer profile that kind of fits this one that we can land and expand and replicate, right? And then you take the same recipe, you build your infrastructure around it, you get your marketing, you get your people, you get your expertise, you provide the solutions, and then you're like, okay, what were the micro and the macro learnings that we took from this vertical, and how can we replicate it elsewhere, right? That gets to that first, that last con that I just mentioned before around niching that Mr. Wonderful talks about. Now you've got that opportunity to replicate, and what I say is land and expand into different verticals. You can have a lot more agility to be able to do that. So those are my three cons of not niching. I'm sorry, my three pros of not niching. Let's look into the cons. So the first one is, and I see this right, and a lot of finance people struggle with this, and you become way widespread. Like you want to go after like 80 different verticals. You're like, we want to go do this, we want to go do that, we want to go do this, we want to go do that. See this in businesses. I see this with finance leaders. I see this with CEOs, right? And this is the common where you go into like a lot of times I see this in the budgeting and the forecasting cycles and plans, right? Where you're trying to measure like 20 different things in a quarter. Realistically, how are you in 90 days going to improve 20 different things, right? So one of the cons of not niching is if you have that CEO or that fractional CFO that is looking to like build that practice and they're just so scatterbrained, they're all over the place, right? It becomes really, really hard to measure ROI. Like, where are you winning? Where are you successful? Where are you putting your resources? How are you really measuring that ROI? So I think that's a major con, is because you can find yourself too widespread. The second con around not niching is the focus, right? I don't know about you, but building a fractional CFO business, it is 100% so much about focus, right? It's so much about focus in the details, but also focus on the strategy. And if you're spreading yourself across a lot of different industries, a lot of different verticals, and you want to be the fractional CFO for everybody, that that that's not going to translate. You're going to find yourself spending a lot of time, energy, and effort, and more so than anything, like, how are you going to measure success? Like at the end of a week, how are you going to sit there and be like, man, we were successful? How are you going to have your team measure success if you're so widespread, right? So I think the one of the other cons of not niching is that focus. The third one is the results and the ROI become hard to measure. This is kind of what I talk about, right? If you're trying to be the fractional CFO for everybody, meaning I don't care what industry you're in, you could be in marketing, you could be in banking, you can be in fitness, you can be in retail, you can be in commerce, you can be in technology. I'm the fractional CFO for everybody, right? How do you measure the ROI of like that dollar that you get from that client, that marketing dollar you put into it, that investment that you put into bringing on resources? How are you measuring the ROI of it? It becomes really, really, really hard because again, you're spreading yourself across so many different places, right? This is the fourth one, and this is probably one of the most important cons to not niching is you lose a lack of clarity, right? You lose a lack of clarity on what you do, how you do it, what value you provide, and how can you help me, and when can you help me, right? When you're sitting across from a client, I get this all the time. My LinkedIn message box booms on a weekly basis, right? And I get these messages from fractional CFOs and other finance leaders and other people that just doing prospecting. And it's like I lack the clarity. Like what do you do? How do you do it? What pain do you solve? Right? Like if you're so widespread, if you're so across the board, and you're trying to position your firm or you're trying to position yourself as that fractional CFO that handles everything, you really like what is it, right? People don't understand like what is it that you focus on, like how is it, like what business that you could do, what value can you have for me? That's the one of the worst positions that you can be in, and I see it time and time again. I've actually had some people that have been in the fractional business or the consulting space for such a long time. That is one universal that all my mentors tell me: you got to have the clarity around that, what you do, who you do it for, how you do it, what value you provide, and how can you help with solutions to that problem. right? That is where you want to have that laser crispness. Like be across three different verticals, right? But if you're trying to be that for 20 different things, think about the message, right? Imagine you're walking across a room and that room is filled with prospects, filled with that prospect that you want. And you walk across and you say, hey, I'm a fractional CFO that can do everything for, I can do everything for every industry. They're going to look at that and be like, it's going to be harder to hear. But if you walk across that space and say, "Hey, we provide fractional CFO and advisory services for high growth businesses, including retail, e-commerce, and technology." Now the people in that room are going to be like, "Oh man, he's speaking to me. He's speaking to that, right?" So that's one thing I always like challenge fractional CFOs and even finance professionals think about when you're in a room with all your ICP, right? What do you want them to hear? What value do you want to provide? And if you're too widespread, if you don't lack the focus, if you're not measuring your investments in the ROI and you don't know if you're you don't know if you're winning or succeeding, that is where that lack of clarity can be it can be discouraging, right? And it can also confuse the market that you're trying to target. So for me, those would be the four cons. Man, I gave you guys so much around this, around the niching aspect of it. Now, you're gonna ask me, Chris, what is your philosophy on it? This is just me, right? This is not me advocating. So let me do all the YouTube disclaimers and do all of this, right? For me, in building Fresh FP&A, I don't believe in niching. I don't believe it. And the reason why I say that is because for me, the team that we have, we intimately know both the macro factors in the industries that we support and serve, but we also know the micro and the macro pains, frustrations, difficulties, and issues, right? For me, I think like the issue of data integrity or the issue of being a scorekeeper, the issue of not having the strategic partnership, right? A lot of those macro factors are across the board industries are facing, right? So, and we go and I have teammates that are like, hey Chris, I'm gonna help build this part of our business specifically on it. Hey, that's what you want to do. More power to you, right? Go ahead and do that. I'm gonna help support you. Fresh FP&A is gonna help you support and build that book of business for you. But overall, and this is something, if I'm being honest with people, this is something I think I've taken throughout my career in accounting, finance, FP&A, and financial leadership is you always have those professionals that are like the jack of all trades or like the master of three different things, right? And just me, I've always found myself as like I like to be like really, really diverse. I like diversity. I like new challenges. I like seeing different things. I like learning new things. I like probably why I took the leap of faith of starting Fresh FP&A, right? I like the difficulty. I like, oh man, I didn't know about that. Let me go learn about it, right? But it's also to a point is like I'm getting that exposure and getting that experience, but I'm also not trying to be that master of like 20 different things, right? So that would be my perspective and how we go about Fresh FP&A. So yeah, that is my do I niche or do I not niche? We went through those pros and cons on both sides of it. And if you want to learn more about how Fresh FP&A can help transform and scale your finance organization, feel free to check us out at www.freshfpa.com. And if you really enjoyed this video, make sure to comment, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell on the YouTube Fresh FP&A page. That way you get all future updates. This is the fourth one that we did. So it's like the consistency's rolling with it. Like we're hitting into it. We're going to keep going these forward. Thank you so much for your time. And as I always leave every video, keep pushing, never settle, and the best is yet to come. Let's get it. Awesome. So thank you guys for joining. I want to leave some time for questions. Man, I am like crisp. I'm getting down on my 30 like minute talk track and getting it down. So uh okay. E-Business 21. Hi Chris. Evelyn. Hey Evelyn, nice to see you. I'm definitely a Shark Tanker for sure. I mean, I can watch Shark Tank on repeat all the time. Like Shark Tank and Jeopardy, those are my to-dos. So if you're here, drop in a question, drop in anything you want to ask me. I want to take some time out to be able to help answer any questions you may have. Yeah. Looks like we don't have any questions. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you have a great Friday. It's a beautiful day here in Indiana, man. It's snowing outside, but with the snow outside, it makes it shine. It's like permanently with like a light on with the snow. But thank you for enjoying. Thank you for watching. Again, make sure to comment, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell on our YouTube page, and catch you on the next one. Have a good Friday, everybody.